We are back in the heart of Hollywood today. We're on Sunset Boulevard, and today we are going to the death home of a true legend in American history and comedy, great Lenny Bruce. Daze with Jordan the Lion, and you all. It begins right now. Much different Sunset Boulevard than he would have known in his day when he passed away. August 3rd, 1966. Here's the old Hyatt, Led Zeppelin Hyatt, the Comedy Store, which was Ciro's in his day. Lenny Bruce is a sad story to me because he was really fighting for freedom of speech his whole life, and the government persecuted him, followed him, got him blacklisted everywhere. What is this? All right, I like it. And that drove him to pure insanity, along with a massive, massive drug addiction. His last house was actually up here on Hollywood Boulevard. Lenny Bruce's mom probably was a lot of the, kind of where his behavior and attitude and everything stemmed from. She was a stripper who eventually became a comedian and then a comedy manager. And she was credited as discovering Cheech and Chong, Pat Morita, Sam Kinison, people like that. And Lenny would also end up becoming a stand-up comedian. He would marry a stripper, and he would end up becoming what some lists call one of the top 3 comedians of all time. He was a satirist. He would see things in the world, and he would bring to light the humor in them. And it was in 1966, after several trials, he had been brought forth on obscenity, that he was finally convicted, and he even in the end was defending himself. If you've seen the Dustin Hoffman movie Lenny, about Lenny Bruce, his real name was Lenny Schneider, and this was the pathway up to his last home here on Hollywood Boulevard. We can go around and see a little bit better view, but he was always being targeted. He believed if words were offensive, that if you just continued to use them, their offensiveness would cease to exist. And so that's what he would do a lot of times. He would use freedom of speech to paint the picture of disarming words. And so he would say those words and people would get offended in his act. He would try and use them in comedy to paint the absurdity, whether it be racism, the social norms, conventions, things like that. And because of his stance, not only was the government getting upset and persecuting him, but also the people that would book him. So that became an issue where, other than Hugh Hefner and Steve Allen, nobody would put him on television. Hugh Hefner used to put him in the Playboy TV show like once or twice, and then even paid for his autobiography. Like, he paid for someone to come and interview Lenny and write his story. Lenny ended up dying right there in that house. So this was a struggle that plagued him for a long, long time. He would do comedy shows, really famous ones that were recorded in San Francisco and Carnegie Hall, and even those recordings would be used against him. Carnegie Hall, they said, was always a really special one because he was so good off the cuff, and pretty much anything that happened during that show, whether someone made a noise or said something, it would trigger him to go off in some sort of direction and just kind of paint the spontaneity of him. But he ended up in 1966 going to trial, and his lawyers just said, like, we're not going to be able to get you off of this. And Lenny was saying, you know, let me do my act, let me show them that it's funny and show, you know, what I'm trying to do here. And they just didn't want him to do it. So they ended up sentencing him to, I believe it was going to be hard labor stint. Now, he had struggled throughout his career. He and his wife both had had drug issues where they would shoot up heroin, and his wife, Honey, even could be, because they had a child and everything, when they were in Honolulu, she got busted at the airport for having marijuana, and that led down a rabbit hole that eventually they saw, you know, that her being connected to Lenny, they could really kind of send a message. And so she ended up getting 2 years in jail, and she would fault him and say that it was Lenny's fault in the end. But he ended up getting that sentence, and then while he was appealing it, he died of a drug overdose here. And when he passed away, he was found nude on the floor in his bathroom with drugs and drug paraphernalia, burnt spoons. So it was very likely something he was trying to do. He just thought that really anything should be allowed to be said in the name of comedy, and that by censoring things, it just made it even more powerful. I think he was definitely right. It's crazy to think that, you know, you watch him now and things that he fought for are so normal now that you almost like don't even find it funny because it's so normal. But in his day, he used to say, you know, he would say sexually explicit things, and then when people would get upset, he would say, people that can't laugh at this also probably can't get sexually gratified as well, and that would offend people. He did, though, after his death, finally in New York, he was pardoned. They did pardon him, gave him a clear record. He was buried with some hoopla at Eden Cemetery, Eden Memorial Cemetery, where Groucho Marx is buried. So we'll go out there. We've been out there before, but apparently they had a unorthodox ceremony for the great one after he passed away out there. But yeah, it would have happened right up here in this house in 1966. Here's the Chateau Marmont, where Belushi died. Axel Foley's back. Beverly Hills Cop. The cemetery that we're going to is a Jewish cemetery, and it is in Mission Hills, right across the street from the cemetery that Richie Valens is buried in. And this bridge that's coming up overhead, that's where Miles is running in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the original.
Listen to me! They're not human! Everyone! They're here already! You're next!
With Kevin McCarthy, he's like, they're here, you're next! He's running through all those cars that was up there. Eden Memorial Park, here we are. If you look at the cemetery on Google Maps, it has Lenny's gravesite noted. So if you come down the hill just a little bit and you find the one lone tree here over top of this section, match that up. Very easy to find Lenny. He is in this direct line. And he's this discolored kind of wet one right here. Lenny Bruce Schneider. Beloved father, devoted son, peace at last. That's what it all ends up with, right? In the end, it's what you left behind. Boy, did he leave a lot behind. Like I said, so many things that he was fighting for seem so silly now because it's just like common. It's just our basic freedom of speech. If you think about, I mean, he was constantly in trouble with the law. That would definitely take a toll on your psyche, I think. The first, or like the earliest case, was something he did on his own where he was trying to help his wife stop working as a stripper, so he devised a little bit of a scheme and founded his own foundation called the Brother Maas Foundation, and it was to raise money for a leper colony. And he ended up getting arrested. Basically what he did was he was posing as a laundryman and stole a bunch of priest clerical or like clerical shirts and collars, and then he was going around raising money for a Guinea leper colony, and he got exposed for it. But the problem was they couldn't really prove, I mean, the foundation he had founded was legitimate. There was an actual leper colony in Guinea, and really everything they were accusing him of, they just couldn't prove it. So in his autobiography later, he said that he did do it kind of as a scam and made $8,000 in 3 weeks, but he did donate $2,500 of it to the actual leper colony. But then pretty much everything after that were obscenity trials from different gigs that he did. He was arrested for obscenity in a jazz workshop in San Francisco. He was, of course, he was calling people the, I don't even want to say the word, but if you know Joey Diaz, you know Joey Diaz's favorite word. Then he was arrested in '61 in Philadelphia for drug possession. Then he ended up getting arrested for calling a sheriff deputy in West Hollywood a schmuck. Then he got arrested again on stage at Gate of Horn Folk Club in Chicago. Then he went to Peter Cook's The Establishment Club in London, performed there, and when he came back a year later, he was banned from entering the country. The guy, then Greenwich Village, he was performing there, and there were undercover cops recording his act. So he really was persecuted, like I said, out at his house. He got to a point where everybody that had ever hired him, respecting what he did, if they hired him, then they were charged. So they quit hiring him. He really had a hard time earning money. At the end, he was pretty much broke. He couldn't afford his lawyers. Like I said, he ended up wanting to represent himself, and the judge actually was like, you shouldn't do that. I can appoint someone else. And he really just kept saying, like, let me do my act. That's the only defense I have, is to let me show you that it's comedy, and they just wouldn't do it. So I have always believed in this case that his overdose was intentional, that he was just tired of fighting the fight, didn't want to go to jail. They even found out later that he was, you know, like I said, he was pretty much penniless, so he was going to lose that house also. So when Lenny Bruce died, like I said, up there at that house, they found him dead, and there was a photo taken at the crime scene of him naked on the floor with a syringe and a burnt bottle cap and, you know, other paraphernalia and things like that. Well, Phil Spector, the record producer who would later be involved in a murder of Lana Clarkson in his home, was a good friend of Lenny's, and he bought the negatives of the photographs to keep them from going to the press. His death was ruled an acute poisoning caused by an overdose. And if you saw the biopic that Dustin Hoffman portrays Lenny Bruce, that's how they kind of ended it, showing that scene, how that photo would have looked. But when they had his memorial service out here, 500 people showed up on August 21st. He passed away on August 3rd, and Phil Spector was out here. Officials tried to block the ceremony after there were ads put in the paper encouraging people to bring boxed lunches and noisemakers. After Lenny died, Playboy magazine, who had always been so supportive, posted a quote that said, "One last four-letter word for Lenny, dead, at 40, now that's obscene." At his funeral, the Reverend said he was in a sense an evangelist on a street corner. He was a man uptight against an artificial world who shattered its facades and its hypocrisy. And if you will pardon the phrase, which seems to become cliche, he saw life as it is. Yeah, he had joined the military when he was 16. and was put in an entertainment show in drag. And after the show, the military made such a big deal about it that they were going to, I guess, court-martial him. And so he pretended to be homosexual so that they would give him an honorable discharge, which they did, and then he joined the Merchant Marines. So he formed a lot of his opinions on things he saw there, and then we got his start working for his mom in the strip clubs, just kind of introducing the acts and the women, and that's where he honed his comedy. So inside the strip clubs, he would see a dark side of life. He would see how people really behaved, and well, he was in the military, so it wasn't just some guy spouting off. This was someone observing life and wanting to talk about it and make light of it. 37 years after his death, he was pardoned, and that's it. The rest is history. He's a legend in comedy, a legend for freedom of speech, and we will see you next time. Have a great night, and goodbye.